What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to More Than a Diabetic. I'm Rob Howe.
I'm Eritrea.
And this is episode 4. This is the final episode in the first release of More Than a Diabetic. This is something that we wanted to do as a sort of campaign launch so that this is very visible and it could create a little bit of buzz, but it's also going to be something that we do periodically ongoing. So we may have, and we don't have them like hard planned out yet, but we're going to have More Than a Diabetic episodes in the future, categories, takeovers, things like that. But for the first installment, first season, if you will, episode 4 is the final episode.
Yeah, it was a good one. I think that this season, as we're calling it, was full of information. It was definitely educational, which was the purpose. This episode, though, is jam-packed full of some ladies that I not only are trailblazers, but that I just really respect, whose opinions are well known throughout the diabetic community. But I'm really excited for you guys to hear their take on so many issues that we talk about in this episode.
Yeah, and before we get into this episode specifically, I think what's been really interesting for me, kind of listening through and going through the editing process of all of the episodes, is how similar so many of our guests' stories are with regard to diagnosis, with regard to interacting with endocrinologists, to diabetes community commentary, showing that I think there really is a Black diabetic experience that is not universal. I wouldn't say that, but it certainly is very similar among that group. Whereas, and I've said this before on the pod, a lot of the previous episodes that we had with a lot of the white people who have been diagnosed with diabetes from all sort of walks of life, those diagnosis stories kind of run the gamut. Some of them get great treatment, some of them don't. There's just a lot of wide-ranging stories, and seemingly it's been a very consistent story from a lot of our guests. So very thankful that a lot of them came on. You mentioned trailblazers. So we have 2 of the women on this podcast who have been involved in the diabetes advocacy, blogging, early social media for quite a long time. And I really value that perspective. And also Priya, the other guest, has been involved in the diabetes community for about 2 years. So she's a little bit on the newer side, but she's lived with diabetes for a number of years. One thing I do have to say before we get into this episode is that we didn't pause and get them to introduce themselves and where to find them. So I'll attempt to do that right now. Sharice Shockley is our first guest. She's Sweeter Sharice on Instagram. She's one of the kind of early trailblazers of the Black diabetes online community and the diabetes online community in general. She started the diabetes social media advocacy chat, which is still going on Twitter these days. I think they do it on Thursdays. So she's a trailblazer in her own right. Then we also have Felissa DeRose, who runs the Black Diabetic Info accounts and organization. She does an amazing job. Her story of blogging under an alias and under a pen name in the early days in this episode is an amazing story, and I did not know that about her. So her story about misdiagnosis and being guilted for using insulin as a type 2 diabetic, and now being re-diagnosed as a type 1.5 LADA diabetic is incredibly interesting and powerful. And then Priya, she's just one name, Priya, kind of like Seal. She's awfully sweet on Instagram, and she is a delight. I did not know her very well going into this, but I'm looking forward to continuing to work with her going forward. She was really interesting.
Priya.
And she's also just fun. So this episode is very cool. It's looking back, we probably had too many guests on some of the episodes, and they're a little bit long and not everybody gets a whole lot of shine, but this is a good one. Having 3 guests allows us to interact with them. It allows them to tell a little bit deeper stories, and we still went for about the whole hour and a half. So this is an episode that I think is more representative of what episodes will look like in the future, just because it was a lot to juggle with 6 or 7 people on the call at one time. And honestly, I'm just glad that everybody was so cool and got along so well that they were able to make really consistent and really cohesive episodes, even with so many people involved.
I think a lot of the people on these episodes are used to speaking on panels with each other. I think a lot of us are community and, like you said, are going through similar experiences, so we can support each other in a conversation in a way that's still interesting to hear. So we definitely hit a sweet spot, though, in episode 4 with our 3. And I think that as we develop More Than a Diabetic, we will get better. So I appreciate everybody's patience listening to our 2-hour long episodes.
I tell you what,
um,
releasing 8 hours of podcasts in 2 weeks, along with like the social videos, has been a lot on me. I cannot lie. It's taken a lot of effort, but I'm more prepared for it next time and going forward. So I hope you guys really enjoyed this episode. I hope you tell your friends about More Than a Diabetic. It's going to live on diabeticsdoingthings.com/More Than a Diabetic. We're going to do a little bit of outreach to try to get some more eyeballs on it, but this is something that you should take the time to listen to. I've gotten some great messages from people at JDRF who were saying that, while it was really tough to listen to some of the feedback, that's the only way that they can do better. And I thought that was a really encouraging response from some folks who obviously had to look at some hard truths. So,
I mean, literally the point. Like, I'm sorry, not just to JDRF, but to any organization, literally the point. So,
yeah.
yay.
So, it's been very cool to have the platform be used for this. And I think it's really important work. And we are going to continue to do it. Maybe not in 2-hour episodes at a time, but in some sort of format ongoing.
Yeah. And, it's a lot of labor done. Like, to be honest, Rob, like, I know you did a lot of the production, putting it together, et cetera, but all this work was done by the people on our panels. It's a lot of emotional labor. And I definitely want to make sure that it doesn't ever come off as like savior work that we're doing, because Rob and I didn't do anything except for allow these people the space to tell stories that they deserve to tell. So
agreed. And I think too, we paid for their time. And, just a small little honorariums, certainly not life-changing, but I was encouraged, and it was a learning for me that when you pay people for their time, they show up and they're professional, and they sort of assign a lot more. I don't know. It seems like work. They show up and they say, "Hey, I'm going to give my best effort for this." And so I want to applaud our guests for that too. They're all true pros, and they showed up and they showed out. And this series is, like you said, a total result of the hard work that they put in, sharing emotional labor, and trauma, and very difficult stories sometimes. So very much.
And Lord, and hopefully we get to tell more stories soon that are not as difficult. Like we talk about it a lot in these episodes, is normalizing normal Black, Indigenous, people of color. So every conversation should not be about the Black struggle. Like, we are going to get to that place where we can just tell regular stories that include Black people, where we don't have to say, hey, this person is Black, so that you can know already that they are Black. So,
right.
I can't wait for us to get there. But with all that being said,
all that being said, enjoy episode 4 of More Than Diabetic, and keep it locked on Diabetics Doing Things. There's more coming your way in 2021 and beyond. So thank you and enjoy. Welcome, everybody, to episode 4 of More Than a Diabetic. I am joined by an incredible group of powerful ladies here this evening. Today, we're going to be talking about a lot of things within the diabetes space related to people with diabetes of color and Black people with diabetes. And, I want to start this off because I really want to curate a very open environment of discussion about some of the things that people of color and Black women with diabetes specifically face online. And I'm going to classify it as quote unquote feedback. And what I mean by that are like microaggressive comments. And most of the people that I see getting that feedback online are women, and specifically women of color. So I want to talk a little bit about that environment from a social media standpoint, and a little bit about sort of the public's dehumanization of women of color, and where people just seemingly give unsolicited advice and feedback where it's really not asked for.
it's a great week to talk about this because of what happened with Lizzo. Did y'all see that? And we can bring it back to diabetes, but like it comes back to this policing of Black bodies. And it's not just Black women, but like, okay, so either you're too fat or you go on the wrong diet and you need to lose weight. Either one, right? So something like that happened this week with Lizzo in the media, and things like that happen in diabetes all the time, where people are constantly judging Black women or Black bodies for doing diabetes wrong, or saying the wrong thing on Instagram, or going about the thing in whatever way they go about it. There's always some kind of commentary. So I guess our conversation is more around the lines of, when you see that happen online, how does that make you feel? Where does your mind go? Kind of tell me a little bit more about that.
I was going to say, for me, when I see comments about Lizzo, you don't see it about Adele, right? People don't make those comments about, what's her name? her character is Fat
Rebel
Amy.
Wilson.
Yes.
Rebel Wilson.
People don't say that about Rebel Wilson. It's like, oh, look at her. She's trying to, get in shape and is very supportive. But if Lizzo wears something that people think is not appropriate, if she decides to freaking hold her flute the wrong way, it's like everybody's after her. And it's funny because I listened to her music, but I watched her interview that she did with Jay Leno, not Jay Leno, but David Letterman on Netflix. It was a one-on-one interview. And she talks about how she uses these crystals to help with her anxiety and how she's been able to speak up and stand up for herself through social media. She's not going to be bullied. And I think that Black women especially are bullied on social. I mean, we've seen it with the JDRF event, or not event, but we've seen it with JDRF and how when they posted their information on social and what the backlash was. And had it been a white woman who came from different diverse background, even though she's white, it still would not have happened. And it's like, no matter what, right? I came out of my mother's womb as this Black person, as a Black woman, and I can't change that. I can't change it. So it's heartbreaking and it's disappointing. And I know Felissa and I, we've talked about this a lot. She's actually helped shed some light on a lot of topics. And my husband, he's a white guy. And it's funny because he actually educated me a lot about Black culture, because like when I first met him, I used to always either wear my hair in a ponytail and maybe once a year I would get it straightened. And one day he saw my hair. He was like, why don't you just wear your hair like that? He was like, you just get out the shower and just go. And I was like, well, because my mom always told me that I couldn't get a job because nobody would hire me because my hair's too big, or that I couldn't wear braids, or that my hair had to be a certain color, like to have all these purple and pinks and greens in your hair and tattoos. Oh no, but then now in this corporate space that I was working in, I see all of these white people come in with purple hair, the earrings in their face and their nose. And I'm not saying that that's wrong. But what I'm saying is, as a Black woman and as a Black person, we would not, I don't care if we had all the skills in the world. Look, we could barely get the job now. So just imagine if we had all those things. So growing up, I was always taught you have to be better. You have to work harder. I remember when we used to have the diabetes summits in the beginning, I used to always have a suit on. Always. I never wore jeans because of how I was taught, because I knew that I was the only Black person in the room and I didn't want to ruin it for anybody else coming. So that's why a lot of things that I do in this online space, I take more of a Martin Luther King Jr. approach. I'm not Black Panther like or Malcolm like, because I want to make sure there's more people after me who has a seat at the table. So that's a very long answer, and I just touched on a lot of things, but that's where I went when you brought up Lizzo.
Oh, I love you for that, Felissa. I know, girl, you sitting there. I'm just waiting for you. I'm waiting.
Well, for me, I think what's most telling is one thing that Sharice knows, and that is I started blogging in 2011. At that time, I was searching for other Black bloggers, and it was slim to none. And I blogged with an alias.
Wow.
And I blogged with an alias for 6 long years. Sharice knew who I was. But that was it. Like, I did not feel comfortable as a obese, fat Black woman blogging about type 2 diabetes because I was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. And it's not until last year I was correctly diagnosed having LADA. But like, I already knew about type 2 diabetes stigma. I already knew about racialized comments to Black people blogging. And the last thing I wanted was to deal with that. So you couldn't even find my email on my blog early on. So it took a step for me to do that. And I have to say, probably within the first 24 hours of me putting my email on my blog, people were like, I've been searching for your email, like a way to contact you, because there was none. And that was encouraging. And I have to say, when I did say come out of the diabetes stigma closet and put my name on my blog, I was still fearful. I never overcame the fear. I just did it through the fear. And by doing that, it's been wonderful for me. But honestly, I can't say that if I had to go back, that I would change it, because I've just seen a lot of abuse. And when you are newly diagnosed and coming into your own understanding of what diabetes is, the last thing you need are those negative comments coming at you. So for me, it's been sad to see a lot of the people coming behind me endure what they've endured. Again, we mentioned the JDRF stuff and things like that. But I found this out, there are people who troll diabetes advocates. They're like,
what?
they are out there.
Facts.
People who troll diabetes advocates. So once I, got trolled by this one particular person who shall remain nameless.
Voldemort.
I was like, hey, like, why is this person coming at me like this? And I have to say that for me, I have learned that social media arguments, intention, some people thrive on that. Like, they are literally sitting behind the computer screen or their cell phone, enjoying going back and forth with you. Meanwhile, me on the other hand, it's not like that behind the scenes. So I'm trying to look up your IP address, you know what I mean? Trying to figure out where you at and meet me around the corner. So I don't engage. I say that to say, I realize that I find myself getting emotional when people start this trolling thing. So I have to unplug. And anyway, I found out by just asking, like, why is this person attacking me? People were like, oh, that person got you, they got me, I blocked them, like, blah, 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 like, ignore it. And then I'm like, oh, so in essence, I have arrived because the troll found me. And I think the way I handle direct conversations, because again, what happened, the situation we're talking about, that was public. Those young ladies could not delete those comments because it was not their page. So when it's directed to me, I have to delete it immediately. I know some people like to save it as, memories of like, this is what happened. I just can't do that. For me, I have to just delete it immediately and then move on with my day. But it happens and it comes, and there's no real like how to handle when people troll you class that you can take to help you deal with it. So early on, like I said, I got too emotionally involved, and I don't do that now.
You know what, Felissa? You just made me think of something. I don't know if I have ever truly been attacked in the online space. One person tried to come at me one time, and me, the approach I take, whatever you say on the internet and whatever you do is on the internet. So I went and I grabbed proof that this person did not know what he was talking about and shut him down real quick. But I don't think I've ever really have had personal experience through direct messages or outwardly, except that one thing. And it was based off of miscommunication, misunderstanding about DSMA's Twitter chat. It was one of the ones we did for research. And then I posted information that this chat is going to be used for research. So if you don't want to participate, don't participate. And they said I didn't put that up, and I found it and I did. But as far as me personally, I have never been attacked. Knock on wood. And I'm not sure why that has been that way. I don't know. Priya, have you ever been attacked?
I haven't been attacked, and I was gonna say I can relate to what you were saying. I can relate to everything that you both were saying just now, because I just joined the diabetic online community like 2 years ago. As soon as you get on there, there's certain people that like come up on your feed for you to follow, you know, the popular ones. They're all white. So me, as soon as I found a Black person, you know, an Asian person, I was like, oh my God, I'm following them right now. You know, it was like excitement, because I just feel like my feed was being flooded, you know, with a certain look, there's certain things that were in all of these pages. And I'm
Aesthetic.
like, why do I keep seeing this, you know? And at first I'm like, I don't know if is this like are we not on here? Like, is it just the white people that are online, you know, more than us? Maybe we're not making pages, you know. And then I started noticing, no, we are on here. It's just harder to find us. I just got really excited when I found other people, you know, that looked like me, but it just it happens to where they're not coming up on my feed as much. And I've never been personally attacked, but I've witnessed other people being attacked, and it just seems so, I don't know, maybe I've grown up and, you know, I'm really respectful to people, and people have been respectful to me, you know, in the real world. But online, I just feel like, you know, Felicia said that people seem to thrive off of, I guess, like insulting other people. And it just doesn't like seem it doesn't seem like realistic to me that you would actually say this, you know, if you were in front of that person. Like, would you continue to act this way if you were in front of a person like that? So sometimes I read these comments and I'm like, is this person like serious right now? All these things that they're saying. And then it makes sense that, you know, they're just thriving off of this. They're just trolling people. They don't really care to understand. And it's just something that, I don't know, they do that they maybe get a high off of. I don't know what it is, but like Felicia said, there's no point in you know, talking back to them. There's no point in you responding. And I've kind of learned that, like, it's messed up that people are saying these things to each other, you know, especially to women of color. I've even seen them say these things to men of color, and it's not fair. But we're not getting anywhere. And I don't know what it is that you need to do to get somewhere with someone that continues to troll, you know, more than one person. Like, how do you fix that? I don't think there's a way to fix that unless Instagram comes up with some kind of like, this is like the Instagram jail, and the more people that you troll, we're going to disable your account. I don't know, you know, what that is, but what you've talked about, I've experienced that being someone new coming on. I haven't been here for a long time. I understand the whole blogging under an alias, because sometimes I feel like it's not what you say. Someone can say, you know, something so intelligent, so eloquently, and it doesn't matter because of what they look like. People aren't going to listen to them. It's not really what you say, it's who says it. And I just hate that about social media sometimes, you know, because I think there's a lot of people out there that are saying like really great things, but they're not getting recognized because of who they are.
Yeah, and it's funny that you mentioned that, because I'm sitting here and as I'm listening to you, I think about all the marketing companies. Doesn't matter if it's in diabetes, it doesn't matter what industry it is, they could do so much better elevating people of color. They could do so much better elevating Black women. They could do so much better elevating them. But for some reason, they always want to go to the white person that has 15,000 followers or 24,000 followers. They don't care about those people that have the 200 followers, not realizing that those 200 followers are better communicators to a certain extent. So these marketing companies have failed, especially in the diabetes space. They failed us as a community, not even just a type 1 or type 2. They failed us as a diabetes community, because when we look at the numbers, we know that there's 1.7 million people with type 1 diabetes, and then the other 34 million have type 2, and the majority of those are Black people, Hispanics, Indigenous, people of color. So it bothers me that these marketing companies have failed because they would rather elevate the voices that already have that lift instead of elevating those that need that lift. So I had to get that out there, because the marketing game is crazy on social media. It's not about the quality of followers you have, it's about those numbers you have. And I notice a lot of industries are starting to change on what they decide is an influencer, but they need to do a better job of elevating, because if they start seeing more Black women, more people of color in the space, it'll normalize it. It won't make it weird, and it won't make it like, oh my gosh, this is hashtag cool, we gotta find us a Black person. Felicity, you know any Black people?
And I think you bring up a great point, Cherise, even outside of diabetes. I think I can speak a little bit to in the marketing and advertising realm, where representation of creatives and staff outside of the top biggest agencies, which are required and have diversity of inclusion officers and are publicly traded and are required to report diversity numbers. It's an extremely insular problem. And what I mean by insular is these people are recommended when they're hiring for new positions. And I can speak to it on a very small scale because I own a very small agency, but where it starts is, hey, do you know anyone? Do you, existing employee, know anyone that would be right for this position? And so immediately you go to your network. And most, this is a generalization and maybe I'll get crucified for this on the internet, but most white people's networks are comprised of other white people. And I think across the board, I think that applies. Like, you attract people that look like you and think like you, your community of people. And a lot of times, just at face value, you look the same and check the same demographic boxes. So as again, insular is the word I'm going to continue to use. They're not even looking outside of their own networks. And I'm guilty of this as well. It takes an extra step in your mind, like, okay, well, if I'm only reaching out to my networks, then I'm going to continue to get the same results. And that's what I said going into this year. Funny how plans for 2020 end up going. But I sent a web page on our website with like 5 things for all of my JDRF contacts to keep in mind for next year. And one of the topics, and I think this really resonates better with event planners, is I put homogeneous programming equals homogeneous attendees. So if you're building a program for white people are going to show up. And when people of color and Black people are looking at the programming, they don't see anything for them. So what reason do they have to go if there's no space for them? So I think like that's, first of all, I think insular and not getting outside of our own networks, not even thinking about these other communities. Priya, you said when you got on Instagram and you started a diabetes account, the first 10 accounts that were recommended to you were all white people. I was probably one of them, and I think if you just went off of Instagram, you would think that only white people live with type 1 diabetes. I think it was, even for myself, like very involved with a lot of different people. I've seen the data. I know that the population data of the United States reflects the population demographics of people with type 1 diabetes. And the only people I was encountering were white. And so again, it kind of comes back to that insular piece where, is it only white people on Instagram with diabetes, or is my network only composed of white people on Instagram with diabetes? And the answer was number 2. And like you said, Cherise, I think when people are looking at programming, other white people from agencies that aren't familiar with diabetes, they don't have any context on any of this. They see, oh, here's some people with a lot of followers. Let's check the box and move on without really digging into historical information and like really understanding who this community is. All right. So these typically I don't talk a whole lot in all of these, but one thing I wanted to also add on, and I think what you guys are really talking about is the whiteness of Instagram in general. And at the top, the large accounts that are promoted, the personalities, the aesthetic, as Eritrea called it earlier, of Instagram is thin, is pretty, and has a standard of beauty that doesn't apply across across multiple races and demographics, and is you're giving me feedback here, Trey. What do you mean? Do you not think
it's just white? No, it's just white. Even when they try to do stuff where it's like we're inclusive, they give you 4 different types of white girl, like the blonde, the brown hair, the red hair, the fat one, like, and then they give you one kind of black girl, somebody who looks like me. Why? So it's not just the pretty thin white girl, because they've already got that message, and then they've included some chubbier ones. That's fine, but they still keep leaving us out of the equation. So ultimately, my question is, when we're talking about microaggression and microaggressive behaviors, when does this stop being microaggressive and we consider it full-on aggressivity and the erasure of Black and brown people, considering the demographics in the United States? I don't see no brown people like Priya. That really makes me mad. Why can't I find any brown people? No South Asians, nothing. Why? They're just erasing us? They're just
It's funny that
suppressing
you
our
say
content?
that too, because I think I was on a Zoom call with someone, and it was an Asian person with diabetes, and she was at a JDRF event, and she's like, somebody came up to me and said that they did not know that Asian people got diabetes. I was like, what? Like, seriously?
And that shame on them for saying that, but also shame on JDRF for not including. And this is not meant to just pick on JDRF directly, but they are guilty, and ADA as well. They don't show all kinds of people living with diabetes. You mentioned India. There are probably more people with diabetes in India than everywhere else combined.
Yes.
And I can't find Indian American diabetics online because either I feel like they're being bullied so that they don't post their stuff like we were talking about, or I'm married to a South Asian man, so the culture is very secretive. Like, you keep that to yourself, you don't talk about it. My mother-in-law is a type 2 diabetic. I barely found out like a year ago. So it's just, I don't see them, and I want to find them, and I just wish that they would be a part of our community, because again, my question is, this isn't microaggressive. This isn't kind of we're subtly being mean to you guys in some way. No. We're fully erasing human beings and their experiences and eliminating them from the narrative. So how do we change that?
Well, that's for me why I know y'all probably don't look at me when I say this, but my preferred platform is Twitter. I will tweet all day because guess what? I find so many people that look like me on Twitter. Like, when I say look like me, so I am involved in, like, I was so happy because I didn't know that there were so many Black women in social media marketing and community. Like, when I found this community, I'm like, oh my gosh, there's more people in this field that look like me. But you don't see it, because even when you look at programs for digital communications, you see a panel full of white people, right? So to see these different communities pop up on Twitter, and the Peloton Black Girl Magic group on Facebook, there's so much magic that happens. And I don't even say anything. I just read the stories because I'm like, I wish I can take this and replace it with Desperate Housewives of Beverly Hills and Real Housewives of Atlanta, because these are the stories. Like, we aren't we're not Nene Leakes. We aren't like that, right? And it's always just that one narrative that people see us as being, which causes people to be hesitant to want to deal with us because of what they're thugs. Oh, they're loud. They're ghetto. They can't afford to be here. It's all of the assumptions. It's not even the stigma about diabetes that gets us, right? It's the assumptions that are already made about who we are as a culture that has defined that experience, the Black experience. And to me, that's where it's jaded. But that's where I and why I hang out on Twitter more so than I do on Instagram, because Instagram is too filtered for me. It's way too filtered. Like if I want to get to know somebody, I'll go watch them on Twitter and then probably follow them on Instagram because it's real and it's raw. And that's how actually, when I first found the community back in 2008, I started into diabetes. And I was like, oh gosh, but see the difference though, between when I found the community and when Felissa and Priya found it, I wasn't looking for Black people. I was just trying to figure out how to deal with this disease because I didn't know nobody. And you gonna tell me I have type 1.5? Like, what is that? So, and that was actually 3 years after I was diagnosed. So I started getting involved. I'm like, okay, I want to share my story about living with LADA because there are probably other people out there that need to hear it. So when Christopher Snyder, who is the community manager over at Tide Pool, when he came onto the scene, I'm like, oh my gosh, there's a Black dude. And then a couple of years later, here comes Felissa. But see, I didn't know Felissa's name. I just knew her as Black Diabetic Info. And one day I slid into her message. I'm like, hey, what's your name? And she took her a few months before she told me, but she was like, you better not tell anybody. This is private. And I don't want anybody to know anything about me. Seriously, I hounded her for years. I'm like, what you do was too good. Like, people need to know who you are. And she just wouldn't do it.
But she was finally vulnerable with you. So I guess that's like a positive that came out of that, is that she was willing to be vulnerable with you and give you more information about herself.
But I learned Sharice for a while. So like I said, when I was diagnosed, it was in the like early evening and it was time for me to give myself insulin. So I opened up my packet of whatever from the hospital. There was insulin, no needles. There was a glucometer, no strips. Like I was very ill-equipped. I went back to the hospital, still have on the bracelet, and was like, I need to go upstairs and ask, like, where is the stuff?
Where's the rest?
And we're like, we can't let you up there. I was like, I was just up there like an hour ago. And they were like, no, you would have to start all over and go to the ER. It was very emotional. But I was looking for any information. So that's what I'm saying. Like I had nothing. And I was looking for any information about diabetes. And so that's when I discovered the DSMA radio talk show. And I would just tune in Tuesday night?
No, it was every Thursday because remember, it was a spinoff to the chat. Yeah.
Got you. So Thursday nights, I was just like tuning in. And then I was listening to people ask questions because I didn't even know what questions I needed to ask. So that was probably where I got the first big diabetes information from. And then I started seeing other people blog. Like I'm a writer, so I knew about blogging. And I blogged from my hospital bed because it was the only way that I could let all my friends know what happened to me. Like I called one friend and she was like, what now? Like, how? I'm confused. And then having to tell that story over and over, I was like, you know what? I'm just gonna like write this out. So I spent 6 days in the hospital and I started my blog there. I knew nothing about diabetes bloggers or like any of that. So it was really the DSMA chat, the radio show, Blog Talk Radio, that let me know that there were other young people with diabetes. That was also important as a person with type 2, diagnosed with type 2, that I didn't know anyone, and definitely not any young people. And then I eventually got involved in a weekly meeting in my city. I was in Fayetteville, North Carolina at the time. Again, the youngest person in the room. So I needed that balance. I needed people who I felt like could understand what it's like to be a young person living with diabetes in a virtual space. But I also needed that, like, I can look you in your eye. I can hug you when you break down and cry. I needed that physical community as well. So I can say this, as we were talking, 2020 has been the first year that I have not had to explain why I have a company named Black Diabetic Info. So I am so thankful for the Black Lives Matter movement, because every year since 2012, when I started Black Diabetic Info, I would have just random, typically white people in my DMs. Why is it Black Diabetic Info? More than Black people get diabetes. What do you mean? Is there some kind of different diabetes for Black people? All the time. 2020 has been the first year that I've not had to deal with all of those kinds of questions and comments.
So you said thank God for the Black Lives Matter movement. So let me ask you and Priya this. After George Floyd happened and Breonna Taylor, how fast did your inbox fill up with new people following you? And was it more white people or was it more Black people that were following you?
It was. I had a lot of white people following me after that. Yeah, I'm not even gonna lie. Yeah, and it was certain ones that followed me that had like a bunch of followers, you know, like the well-knowns. And I'm like, why are they following me all of a sudden? I mean, I know why, you know, but yeah.
It was funny. I was like, me and Felissa were talking, and I'm like, I think I had like 400 people follow me in like a week's time. And I'm like, and it became to be a little overwhelming because for me, I mean, I'm Black, right? But it's not my job to educate the masses. So I found myself going into that, okay, I got all these white people following me. Like, I need to tell them this, and that. And I'm like, hold up. No, it's not my job. However, what I do sometimes is if I have a friend, because I feel like if I have a really close white friend who I would rather them ask me questions than for them to get called out and ridiculed on social media. So I do act as that point person for my white friends, because I just would hate for them to post something and me see it. I will feel extremely bad if I did not help educate them on the topic.
I feel that, Sharice. I feel that because I know it's not our job. I feel that because I do it also, and other Black people hold me accountable for it. They're just like, listen, that's not our job. And you doing that enables white people to continue living in dumbness because we are facilitating information for them. But regardless, I feel what you're saying because I have relationships with white people that I love dearly, that are diabetic, that I've known since I was little, whatever. And they say sometimes off the color things, like I have to send a DM where it's like, yo, please don't say no AAVE on Instagram. Like, hey, don't say that. Because you love that person regardless of whatever. And you would rather correct them yourself than have somebody snatch their hair, wig, ear off of their body in the street because you know that it will happen. So
or they lose their job for saying the wrong thing.
But I have a question because you really touched on it when you said the thing about George Floyd, how many people flooded your DMs. And I wonder, just to make it a little bit more cohesive, not just for diabetics, but just like to bring it to the real world. Did that happen at all with white people in your real life? Did anybody reach out? I had somebody send me money for Starbucks and was like, I'm so sorry. I'm dead ass. So I wonder, did anybody reach out in your real life to be like, hello, I'm a white person that you're friends with. I'm sorry, whatever. Some kind of verbal reparations.
I have a lot of people. I was gonna say, Felissa, you can go first because I got some stories, but I'll let Felissa go.
All right, my stories are short on this one. I can honestly say I don't know what to do with it. I simply do not know what to do with it. So when you ask the question, Sharice, like how fast did it happen? My comment was more about how long is it lasting? So like even this week, I've gotten this kind of like, I don't even know what to really call them, like confessionals. You know, when you're just bombarded with the white guilt confessional, I don't know what to do with it. And you know, I get them all the time. And
Please, Felissa, forgive me for I have been a racist.
I'm getting like honest, like I just had no idea.
Oh,
And
the I'm so sorry's, the please forgive me that I'm crying. This hurts my heart.
Well, I can say this. I have been an attendee to the White Privilege Conference for like a long time, like back in the day when it was held in Iowa. So White Privilege Conference 1, 2, or 3, like very early on. A conference of like 500 people. I was probably one of maybe 20 Black people at the White Privilege Conference. And so I've definitely witnessed mounds of white guilt in one space at one time. And because I've had that experience, when people send me messages, I already like know what it is. My thing is, I honestly don't know what to do with you waking up now in 2020. So I don't think it's more about me, but and I have to say this, I'm a professor. So I'm an educator at heart. So when people come to me and they have questions, my first instinct it isn't my job to teach you. Because as an educator at heart, yeah. I want to educate people. And I feel like if my friends see me as a person that they feel comfortable saying that to, I'm just there to receive it. I still don't know really what to do with it. I just simply reply, okay, or give it a thumbs up, because I think they needed to say it, not to me, but just to let it out. And like when I was at that white privilege conference, they had a whole row of like counselors in the back. And they were like, if you are overcome with, white guilt and whatever, we have counselors in the rear. And so the only time I spoke at that conference was when I said, like, even at the white privilege conference, you're privileged. I just want you to know that, because when I was called the N-word for the first time in elementary school, there was no counselor for me, And then I just went down the list of things that I have experienced as a woman in a Black body that there was no counseling for me. And so when people, say these things like, I want to be here for you, or, I'm just waking up and I, know, I'm curious about the actions behind it. Like after you send me that email, or DM or whatever, like what steps are you going to take? So that's when I say, I don't know what to do with it. I read it. I respond by saying, okay, or, thumbs up, or I don't know, pow. I really don't know what to give you. I'm lost. But I do feel what a person might feel to have even provoked them to write that, is what I'm saying. That I haven't gotten anything that was from someone that was not genuine. And I think they genuinely didn't know what they didn't know, because our society makes whiteness invisible. Mm-hmm. Like even when we're talking about who has diabetes the most and what causes diabetes, poor white people succumb to the same thing. But we don't hear about poor white people because it's been invisible. And unfortunately, like the white privilege hasn't worked in their favors if they're, getting diagnosed with diabetes at alarming rates, but that's not in the news, right? Mm-hmm. So they aren't getting getting the treatment. So my thing is just, with that, I'm still getting them.
You're still getting them?
I told you this week.
Yeah, that's true.
Priya, do you get them? Does anybody
Yeah, but
does anybody hit you and is like, hey, I'm so sorry that you've had to struggle in your brownness or anything?
Actually, no, I don't. I haven't gotten messages or anything like that from anyone about that. No.
We got a Y in your white friend pool.
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it's funny
We need
because
to push these crazies on her. Like, here you go,
I
Priya,
know.
take some.
No,
Well,
but
it's
you know
funny
what?
because
When you guys were, sorry to cut you, but when you guys were talking about, even your friends in real life, like, honestly, I don't have any white friends. I mean, I'm acquaintances with white people. My best friend is Haitian.
I
And
said,
I was thinking about it when you guys were saying that, like, I have white coworkers that I'm close with. But throughout my life, I haven't really had like a white friend that I was like this with, you know what I mean? Like,
Mhm.
so I just haven't, I don't know, I just don't have
Got
the,
lucky, I guess. I'm just kidding.
no.
Just kidding.
you ain't met the right one, honey.
Yeah, I was gonna say, so like for me growing up, I went to, predominantly Black schools. I would say, and I grew up around politicians, so white politicians, Black politicians, but I didn't realize. So I was in the Army, I was in the Army Reserve, and I went to basic training. So I am in barracks with 60 women from all walks of life. When I say all walks of life, I didn't know that there was, like, I thought this girl for about 6 weeks, no lie. I was like, dang, that Black girl speaks some really good Spanish.
I hate you.
And I'm like, oh my gosh. And then her last name was Robles. And she was like, I'm from the Dominican Republic. I'm like, I had no clue. And it's not because I didn't, and this goes back to education and why I help people, even when it's not my job, because I was someone who didn't know until I got exposure to it, right? So if you grow up in areas where you're, predominantly Black school, me and Felissa had this conversation before, is you don't know anything else. So for me, if, there's not a lot of people that will go serve their country to get exposure to all different walks of life. And there are people who may go to an all white college or all Black college. And even if they don't, they're going to stick with who they're comfortable with. Mm-hmm. I was pushed into that by choice. I wouldn't change it for the world, because that right there was the best place to learn about culture, mm-hmm. from women from Alabama, from women that never been around Black people. I mean, all in one. But by the end of that, I was the Black person saying prayer for my platoon. These people may have came in thinking differently about Black people, but for them to have me stand up and lead them in prayer speaks volumes, right? So that's why, like Felissa said, it's not my job, but I was once lost or didn't know, and I educated myself based off of my surroundings. So now I can say that yes, my husband is white, but my mom never raised me to be around just one culture, because she wanted to make sure that I could handle myself in all situations. She wanted to make sure that I can have an articulate conversation with a white person. So like when I met somebody for the first time, I had to shake their hand, look them directly in the eye and say, hi, my name is Sharice, back then was Smith. Nice to meet you. Because it takes away that I'm equal and this is who I am and it's okay. So I just think it just depends, right? Like I had some really cool conversations, but I think for me, what got me, it wasn't that the people that were reaching out, it was the people that were trying to create something without including Black people in it. That was the straw that brought the camel's back for me. You can say, you know, I'm sorry, right? But at the same time, don't try to fix something without including Black people or people of color in the conversation, because we're going to be right back at square one doing the same thing all over again.
Or even including them in a way that, oh, I'm sorry. Or even including Black people and people of color in a way that's not well thought out, because I feel like this year, after the murder, because that's what it was, the murder of George Floyd, there was an influx of amplify Black voices, amplify Black voices, amplify Black voices, and I'm gonna be silent and blah blah blah. And there, I did see, you know, some accounts. I even did a live for one account myself, you know. So there was some accounts that asked, you know, a lot of us to speak, and we did, but then it turned into just talking about being Black the whole time. And unfortunately, for a lot of people, I am more than just a Black person. I'm a woman, I'm a wife, I'm a human being, I'm annoying, I'm all kinds of things. And I'm not just a Black person. So I want you guys maybe to touch a little bit on how important it is for us to normalize being regular people, and how we're not just magical people of color to be amplified once in a while. And maybe if you could touch more on also on how the after of that, like how there's been no follow through from a lot of these people who wanted to amplify our voices and now take up so much of the space, you know. So yeah, that's kind of what I wanted to bring to you guys and see what you guys had to say.
Well, I just want to say this, because Sharice and I do talk about the different schooling. Like, I'm from South Florida, and I was the only Black kid in my preschool. I grew up during the time of integration. So no, I wasn't born in the 50s and 60s. It's just that when you are in the South, that's how long it took for things to actually manifest. So I was bussed out of my predominantly Black neighborhood and sent to white school. So like my first best friends were Cassie and Laura, two white girls. I don't know where they're. Cassie and Laura, if you are out there, I still remember preschool days when we used to be a trio. And so I've never had that like experience of my education setting being just like an all Black setting or anything like that. And fortunately, I never felt outcasted either. Some of the things were hilarious. So even when I was a Girl Scout, I was the only Black girl at my Girl Scout troop, and I don't like chocolate, so they used to buy me white chocolate. So it was hilarious to see like 7 Black Santa Claus, because they were chocolate, and then the one white Santa or the one white Easter egg, and then it was mine. Like, we used to laugh about that kind of stuff. So I've had, and I still do have white close friends. And because I grew up in South Florida, Dominican, Haitian, Trinidadian, like my identity isn't just like being a Black woman, it's being a human being. And all of these diverse ways of being in the world. For me, that's one of the reasons why I started Black Diabetic Info, because I wanted to know, how can I eat the foods that I'm used to eating? I love Jamaican beef patties, but I didn't see that in the nutritionist information that I was getting. You know, I like palik paneer, you know, I like all kinds of different foods from, you know, where I'm from in South Florida. Like, anything you want, you pretty much can get it. And so like that was important for me. And when it comes to the follow-up, I'm still waiting on the follow-up from a lot of people reaching out. That's why I said, like, when people reach out, I just hear it. You know, they want someone to listen. I'm like, okay. But then I'm also, you know, waiting, like, what now?
So for me, same thing. I haven't heard any follow-up, but I wanted to do this event, right? No sponsor, no nothing. And I wanted to have this like a true discussion of where do we go from here as a diabetes community. We need to get it all out on the table. We need to air our grievances. And in order to do it, it would take more than just me. And I just I can't keep taking on projects because there's more stuff to keep going by the wayside. But I think that in order for us to really move on as a community, we can't do it with the big three orgs. We have to take ownership. And when I say ownership, I don't mean ownership. We need to come together as quickly as we can get together and do 30-day challenges in World Diabetes Awareness Month. We can quickly come together and have psychologists, have people with diabetes, I hate the word influencer. We can have, those advocates, activists. We can come together and figure out what's next for us. Because if we continue to wait for JDRF, they have people that they're accountable for. They've had so many layoffs, and all these people that were supposed to be helping with this, most of them are gone. And then if we wait on ADA, so I think that if anybody wants to join this nice big program that I have inside of my head, and we can get the ball rolling, let's do it, because I think it's going to have to take us to be able to do it.
I just want to say what's beautiful about having been a part of, diabetes communities for many years now, like heck, almost a decade for me, is seeing the growth. Like, I think people like Priya, who, you're new, like, I don't even think you could imagine the dearth that was there 10 years ago. Like, there was no Instagram. There was no Facebook. Like, you had to really go on like some excavation hunt to find people. And like, some days I just sit back and I hear, the problems and things like that. And I just think like, we're at a place where we have these problems, because at some point it was like 30 people, you know what I mean? And we just did not have the magnitude of problems. It was little issues with personalities, but sometimes I just sit back and I do think that it is beautiful, the decade of growth with diabetes communities.
Oh, you just made me think about when I first found a community. Like, I remember finding a community, and at the time I was very vocal. And then somebody talked me into joining Twitter. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is really cool, because I can see these people in action that actually write a blog, but like, you can see their life on Twitter. Like, it's when they're upset, when they're angry, when a pharmaceutical company ticked them off, or when their blood sugar is 40 and it's in the middle of the night and somebody from Australia responds. Like, I remember those days where the problems that we had in the community was the same people going to the blogger summits, and the cost wasn't about insulin. It was about the cost of test strips. I remember there was a campaign for anti-CGM denial where Gina Capone put this thing together, and she took it up as a community petition for insurances to pay for CGMs. Like, those were the days when, and people are going to listen to this and they're going to get mad at me. The price of insulin, and I want you to think about this, the price of insulin has continued to rise for years, but until it affects a white person, until it affects a white person's bottom line, they don't care about the people who is struggling to rob Peter to pay Paul to make ends meet. But until those deductibles get way too high, then they want to make noise. That's my issue, because people have been struggling to pay for this stuff for years. But until, and I want y'all to listen to me, until it affects a white person, nobody cares. Nobody says anything. And partially because people of color, for me, I was taught that, and I haven't been in a situation, but I have been in a situation where I watched my mom cry on the bed trying to scrape pennies together so she can go buy a loaf of bread. So I understand what it's like to struggle. I grew up with it. But for me, we are taught that we rise above, and by any means necessary, you don't complain. If there's a will, there's a way, and you go figure it out. My mom used to say all the time, I never had to do this, but if I had to go prostitute to make sure y'all have some food, I'm gonna make sure you have some food. You will not go without. And I saw people on Facebook come back and tell my mom, I never knew you were struggling because you always gave to us when we didn't have. That's the Black community. But like I said, those prices of insulin, Felissa, you were struggling paying for insulin.
Child, we don't want to talk about my struggle.
Right, but when you found the diabetes community 10 years ago, was anybody talking about the price of insulin then?
Nope, and I was struggling real bad. Changed the way I worship God. And I'm going to tell you, when I went to my first diabetes walk with a big organization that shall remain nameless, I went there thinking that I was going to be able to get some assistance with the insulin price. And when I found out that they don't help, that was my last one. So I do tons of 5Ks, but them diabetes 5K, I can't. I'd rather take my $30 and give it to somebody who was struggling just like I was. But I sure did. I went there for help. Now I got every kind of, swag bag, pen and cup and all of that. I walked away with plenty of that. But that $180 copay, and I had to figure out how I was going to put gas in the car. I rode around all summer with no air condition because I couldn't afford to get the air condition fixed and my insulin. My struggle goes deep on that insulin. And I'm a professor with the good health insurance.
This inherent need. I've been telling Rob, and we said this in another episode, but it's like, and it's just to touch on what Sharice is saying with like, people didn't really seem to care until it was happening to white people, until those deductibles, until the movement released, the insulin for all really started because someone passed away.
No, hold on. I'm gonna back you up a little bit. The Insulin for All movement was actually started to help people in underserved countries by T1D International. It was not started in the US. It was started by Elizabeth, who happens to be from the US, but it originally was created to help people in underserved, under-resourced countries get access to insulin.
Well, then I'm glad you said that, because that brings it full circle for me, because what my point was going to be, this inherent need, want, desire to watch Black, Indigenous people of color struggle. And just, that's what that makes me think about. Like, I just don't understand it. And like you said, Sharice, that we were taught to overcome. I know that in some brown culture, it's also very prominent, Priya. So I wonder if you could tell us a little bit more about that from your side.
I mean, as far as I remember, because I wasn't on Instagram back then, but I remember when my insulin was only like $20 per box. And then I don't know how all of a sudden now it's so expensive. So I have to use like the coupons. I use the coupons to get my insulin. But I mean, without those coupons, my insulin's $1,900. So I'm, thankfully I can use the coupons and I'm not struggling with it. But, there's worry that maybe one day I will be. I don't know. And yeah, like the same way, I think we were raised, just find a way. When there's a will, there's a way. You'll get it done. We'll get it done. We help each other. We're not going to worry about it. My dad's the same way. He could be struggling, but still helping out his brothers and sisters, and they wouldn't even know. So, I mean, that's thankfully I'm not struggling right now, but
Well,
No,
and
I feel you
I think
guys.
that sort of speaks to the chronic nature of diabetes as well. Like exactly what you just said, Priya. Like I'm not struggling right now, but like none of us know what tomorrow will bring. None of us know 10 years from now. I think we can all point to different parts of our journey with diabetes and advantages, disadvantages, depending on the time. Felissa, though, I want to focus on two things. I want to answer Sharice's question because I think, or statement about no one's going to care about the price of insulin until it affects the white people's bottom line, which I agree with. And I think I frame that in a way that we are every single person in the US is one chronic illness diagnosis that they didn't cause away from really caring about coverage for pre-existing conditions. So in Texas specifically, which is where I live, so I focus primarily on policy, many of our legislators vote against coverage for pre-existing conditions. No matter what they say publicly, when it comes time to vote, they vote against it on the Affordable Care Act. Their kid could be diagnosed with diabetes or any other chronic illness that they have no say over tomorrow. And at that point, coverage for pre-existing conditions becomes really important to that person. But what I really want to focus on for you, Felissa, because of your misdiagnosis and the years that you lived with type 2, the symptom, or not the symptoms, but the stigma around your need for insulin and the sort of shame of like, well, if you only just did XYZ, you wouldn't have to worry about insulin. So it's not the same as my white child who is diagnosed with type 1 and they didn't do anything to get it. I imagine that you experienced some of that. And I think that false narrative, I think that some of the organizations we've mentioned are doing a better job of helping that diabetes education narrative sort of be lifted up to where there isn't as much stigma being perpetuated, but that stigma very much exists that type 1, I have the bad kind of diabetes. I didn't do this to myself. And these are, air quotes, but talk to me a little bit about that stigma and that battle as a person who lived with type 2 diabetes for many years.
So I can say this. Fortunately for me, when I was diagnosed, it was DKA. Like I had passed out in my bathtub. By the time I got to the emergency room, I could no longer stand. And I was in a wheelchair. And I say, fortunately for me, it was DKA because that meant I started out on insulin. So some people who are diagnosed with type 2, they never saw insulin as the thing that saved their life. So I have to say that is the bedrock from which my diagnosis started. And it helped me because I have little doubt that I probably would be like dead. And I say that because when you are diagnosed with type 2, everybody tells you that insulin is a bad thing, that you aren't doing your part, that you have to get off insulin. Like that was my thing. Like I have to get off insulin. I have to get off insulin, even though, I recognize it as this thing that saves my life. But I definitely felt like the insurance companies did not give me the same discount as a person with type 2 when it came to my copay, because my medical data says type 2 taking insulin. It doesn't say insulin dependent. And that right there makes a big difference in how much you're paying. It also, as a person with type 2, I did not have access to CGM. So this is before Libre, right? So I did not have access to CGM. I am taking insulin. So I'm succumbed to the same amount of hypos as anybody else taking insulin. And I don't have access to that data. Not only that, but when you are living with type 2, most insurance companies in the States and abroad, because I've lived in 3 countries and managed diabetes, they only give you 50 strips a month to test your blood sugar. So how can you accurately know what is going on with your body? But yet you're told when you aren't doing the best job you're doing a horrible job, right? But like I said, when I left discharged from the hospital, I didn't even have the necessary tools to manage my diabetes. More or less, the stigma of it's my fault from society and other places. The news, you go into Barnes and Nobles, you can reverse your diabetes, just change this diet, get on back. So everything is saying, I'm taking this insulin because I'm not doing my best. And so when things changed, last year, I noticed whatever I was doing was not working. And it turns out I have LADA, I'm insulin dependent. What that does to your psyche when you have lived for 8 years being told that insulin is a bad thing. And like I say, fortunately, I didn't absorb all of those messages, but I have to say it did penetrate, right? It's a shift. It is a shift, and also the amount of insulin is also a shift. I get like when I first like told the blogosphere that I had LADA, I remember this one lady was like, I'm going to give you this recipe for a shake. So she gives me the recipe for this shake, and then it has a carb count of like 94, and I'm like, what? 94? Like I have not ingested 94 grams of carbs since I have been diagnosed with diabetes, because as a person with type 2, you can't consume more than 45 grams. So I'm like, what you can have 94 grams of carbs? You know what I'm saying? So like the whole thing is different. Even the day my endo told me, oh my gosh, stop taking everything, come in and get insulin, you have LADA. The lady got up from her desk and walked me to the diabetes educator, because I could not leave that office without knowing how to manage diabetes. Y'all know I get emotional, so I'm gonna have a little moment. Compare that. When I was diagnosed with type 2, I was sent home with a bag that had incomplete supplies. I'm diagnosed with type 1, and she has to walk me, escort me, because there is no way I'm able to leave the facility without being educated on how to manage diabetes. This is the reality of the difference in those types. And you want to know why people with type 2 aren't doing well? You want to know why people with diabetes, with type 2, don't want to take their insulin? They're ashamed. I can't even tell you places I had to give myself injections, and how, and under tables and in dirty bathrooms, because I don't want to be seen as the obese Black woman giving herself an injection. Like that's just the reality, and it's hard. And like I say, I'm certain that there are people who are living with LADA, misdiagnosed. Nobody wants to do the antibody test. They believe they have type 2, and because they now need insulin, feel like they have failed. Because that's what was happening to me all of last year. I had DKA last year. I was so thin. People were like, you look good, girl. And I was like, I'm dying. Like something I know is wrong with me. I couldn't get my blood sugar under 250 no matter what I did. So I knew something was wrong. And that whole time, you know what was going on? It wasn't maybe you have type 1. It was you failing. You're not doing enough. You're not running enough. You haven't done enough 5Ks. You haven't counted your carbs enough. You haven't cut out. Like it was all on me. So I spent many months in my new diagnosis getting all of that out of my body. Just really just getting it out of my pores, out of my spirit, out of my emotions. But that was all I was bearing, the weight of type 2 stigma. And that's what it causes. I'm just a year into it, and I'm still adjusting.
Felissa?
You done dropped some mics on us.
Yeah, it's because every time I hear it, right, it ticks me off because I wasn't misdiagnosed. I knew that I was going to have to be on insulin eventually. But what ticks me off is this was how many years ago, Felissa? You said 8 years ago? 8 years ago.
8 years, yeah. 2011.
You still hear the same stories about people with type 2 diabetes, black, white, whatever, leaving the doctor's office without proper diabetes education. Now, we can talk about all the things that's wrong with the community, and we talk about type 1 issues, but until we address these issues of not just type 1 or type 2, but as a diabetes community, we're going to continue to have stories like Felissa's. We're going to continue to have stories like Alex Smith. We're going to continue to have these stories, and we shouldn't have them. This is 2020. There is no reason why anybody with type 2 diabetes should be leaving the doctor's office without proper education. And the reason why I say that is my husband, like I said earlier, he's white. He was diagnosed with type 2 on my 10th diabetes anniversary. Very crazy. And Aww. It was crazy. They were like, the first thing they did is, you have diabetes. I was like, y'all need to check for antibodies, right? But the funny thing is, when we went to the doctor's office, not funny, they gave him metformin, didn't give him a meter to check his blood sugar to see what the metformin did. When I demanded that we see a diabetes educator so he can get his meter, I asked how many times should he check his blood sugar. Oh, it doesn't matter, whenever he has time. So you have a story of a Black woman, and you have a story of a white man with diabetes, same outcome, get treated like poo-poo because it's a lifestyle thing. And my husband was an active duty Army, so it has nothing to do with weight. It has nothing to do with lifestyle. It's active duty Army. So the community, we need to figure out how to get past this small stuff, because the more time we spend on trying to be seen, trying to be an influencer, is the more time we spend away with real issues. And I'm not just talking about a type 1 issue. I'm talking about type 2, because eventually people on type 2, whether they have ladder or not, well, there's a big chance they're going to end up on some type of insulin. So we got to figure out a way, y'all, to work together. Like, advocacy may not be your thing. Insulin for all may not be your thing. But when we come to this place called the Diabetes Online community, we're all brothers and sisters. We all have diabetes. It's period, point blank, because my husband has the same regimen I have, and he takes way more insulin than I do, and he's type 2. So with that being said, we have to put the differences aside so we can move on, so we can continue fighting for each other. We have to. I don't care what type you are. We have to. In order for us to make moves, we have to work together.
I couldn't agree more. I think, I mean, the law, when you like zoom out and you say, okay, if there are 34 million people in the United States today living with type 2 diabetes, and how many stories like Felissa's have we heard of misdiagnosis of type 2, later is discovered via antibody test after years of non-compliance, switching endos and getting diagnosed correctly as type 1, a lot of type 1.5. So let's just say conservatively, there's 2%. If 2% of those 34 million people are LADA, that's almost 700,000 people. So when you think about that in terms of just general population of type 1s, that's almost that's more than half of the numbers. And so, again, one thing this podcast has sort of taught me is that everybody's diagnosis experience is completely different. Eric, you guys shared yours. Eritrea and I recently talked about ours, diagnosed in the same hospital, like 3 years apart, 4 years apart, and had totally different experiences. And our first few moments with diabetes set us up for what momentum we're going to have, what relationship we're going to have with it for a long time. Sometimes it never changes. I think only by will and curiosity, power of human spirit, what have you, power of community, discovering other people, do we get access to the information that we need. It really changes that relationship. Felicity, you said like you spent 8 months getting it, this old ways of thinking out of your body. And I think that's, what I hope, as a greater community, we start to do for each other is to understand that we all have different issues that we're dealing with. But we also all have diabetes of some kind and are facing a lot of issues together. And I think we're more powerful united than we could ever be independently. And that's the only, that's all I can say now. And I think you guys are right. Earlier, there was a lot of momentum over the summer of a lot of people saying the right things. And now I think something that I really believe and have bought into from a culture perspective of organizations is what you do is who you are. It's anyone can say anything. I mean, the phrase is talk's cheap, right? Back it up with action. And what you do is who you are. Are you going to be on the right side of history or not? And I think that's the rubric that I think we have to hold ourselves accountable to, like me personally, as well as like, are we doing the work? Or are we just talking about it?
I've been making him do it. Don't worry. We've been doing it. I'm just kidding. Rob's been on it anyway. No, to be completely honest, and we've talked about it in a few series, he's really upfront and honest about how whitewashed diabetics doing things used to be. And this year we've completely turned it around. You look at our grid from 6 months ago and you look at it now and it's just like the difference is crazy because we want to be on the right side of that. Like we definitely want to amplify these voices all of the time, not just on Juneteenth during Black History Month or whatever it may be.
And I think I was gonna say for me, right, I think I have become accustomed to being let down by organizations and white people just in general for many years, that to me it's like, oh, well, whatever, right? If they don't do it, somebody will do it. And if I have to do it, I'll do it, right? So for me, it's so crazy because it shouldn't be that way. It should not have to take, 25 diabetes advocates to get together to say what we're going to do next, right? It shouldn't. When they have the money, they have the sponsors, they have the support to do it, and we don't. But I would say for me, I'm just so used to it that I don't expect anything different. It's not going to stop them from reaching their bottom line. And it's reality. Because if it truly was going to stop them from reaching their bottom line, a lot of these companies wouldn't be where they are today.
I do want to say something on Sharice's behalf, is that in those early days when certain companies would bring together the diabetes who's who, like the 15 to 20 people, they really spoke a good game. And they had the buy-in of those people. And then like you never heard from them again until it was that certain time in the fiscal year. And then they would rally the troops again. and then you wouldn't hear anything else. And then it would, so I do have to say that she's not sounding like an eternal pessimist out of not having personal experience. Like it was a lot of events where, you know, they thought like, oh, there is a group, there is a diabetes, you know, online community, let's tap into them. And the momentum was, yes, we get to be at the ideal stages for diabetes marketing. We get to do a lot of, they sold it, you know, and still to this day, sometimes we just don't hear anything back.
Yeah, I've been doing this since 2008. I think we went to an event where I met Rob for the first time. And I did the same thing that I always do. I raised my hand after looking around the room and said, where are the Black people? Where are the people of color? Where are the people with type 2? Because people with type 2 diabetes have low blood sugars. And Rob, I don't know if I ever thanked you for this. So I'm sitting here, y'all. I'm at this new company, have no clue who these people are. And it was funny because I remember somebody saying, you know, we're the first to do this. And all the OGs in the room looked at each other. We're like, no, you're not the first to do this. Now, you probably are the first to get an honorarium to do it because we've been giving up our vacation time and our time with our family to make sure you have this seat at this table today that you get. So you are reaping, you are getting rewarded for the strides that we've made over the past 10 years. So Rob, thank you, because when someone was trying to make a point, and I was like, well, Black people, some Black people would like to see Black doctors, right? And so he was trying to justify and trying to, was it gaslight? Gaslight what I was trying to say. And Rob said this. He said, you check the box. He said, I checked the box. He said, I'm white. I think he said, I forgot what term he used, but I'm gonna say straight. I'm straight. He said, I check every box. And you do too. And I'm paraphrasing. But he pretty much got this other white guy to really see where I was coming from. But he couldn't, he was so caught up in his own system and what he saw in his bubble and not looking at the big picture. And I think that's what's wrong with a lot of people, not even just in the diabetes space, but in the world, that they only see and they only can go as far as their bubble will allow them to see, and they don't want to go out. So Rob, thank you so much for having my back, because I'm not gonna lie, I'm a very peaceful person, but I am not a very peaceful person. I used to be a bully.
You're not with the
fighter.
shit.
Yeah.
You're not with the shit.
Not to do it.
The message here is there should be more Robs. There should be more white people like Rob who, no. This is not to make you awesome, because he gets all weird when you compliment him too much. So that's not what we're doing. But what I am saying is that there should be more white people who have the clout, who have the seat at the table, who stand up for us. It shouldn't just always be us being like, hey, stop, this fucked up, don't do this. There should be more people like him who are like, hey, you're attacking this person of color and it's not okay. And I, a white person, am not going to let you get away with it.
Well, first of all, thank you, Cherise. I'll never forget that day. My heart was racing. I had I could feel the tension in that room. A lot of people that it was the first time a lot of us had ever met in person. It was a corporate event. It was very much, like you said, a market research type event. And thank you for starting the conversation and addressing the elephant in the room that like, hey, 85% of the people here are white. There's almost no people here with type 2 diabetes. Did you guys know that people who take insulin, when Felissa mentioned it earlier, People who are insulin dependent on type 2 suffer from just as many, if not more, hypos than people with type 1. So clearly, like, and I think you did it rightfully so, used your space at the table to address an issue. And I'm over there like, yeah, all right, I'm all over this. And then there was resistance. And I think an uncomfortable response from other people in the room because they didn't know what to say and they didn't know what to do. And I think in another one of our More Than a Diabetic episodes, we talk about you can't call someone a racist because their first response is, I'm not racist. And here's all the reasons why. And I felt like in that moment, first of all, I think I said I'm a white, cis, straight, white male. And there's never not a great time for people like me to be quiet. Like sometimes you just got to shut up and you just got to let it and hear someone else's point of view. And you don't have to, whether you agree with it or not, you got to give them the space, first of all. But I'm lucky that at that time I had spent 2 weeks before was my 30th birthday. And I spent my time on my birthday vacation listening to audiobooks of how to be anti-racist because it was something that I felt like we had not done in my life. And I just needed to know more tactically, more clearly what my role as a white person could be. And if I had not done that, I may not have been able to speak to that in that way. And so I think I want people who are listening, who are white and want to be accomplices, not allies, and want to be involved in how to lift somebody up in a moment, because, I don't want to throw any of my other friends in that room under the bus, but nobody else was stepping up to have the conversation with him and go to bat for you in that moment. Not because they didn't think that it was right, but they didn't know how. And that's where, to me, I call myself a leader or anything if in those moments where, you mentioned Dr. King earlier, like sometimes the Instagram quotes, like injustice anywhere, there was injustice right there. You got to step up and say something about it. And yeah, it was awkward in that room. You cut that tension with a knife and my heart was racing, but I felt in that moment, I was like, this is why whatever was on my heart during my 30th birthday to prepare and listen to those books made me ready for that conversation. And it went over okay, I think. And, but at the same time, if I hadn't have done that extra work, I wouldn't have been ready for that. So I think that's where, some people's idea of being the change you want to see in the world is sharing the photo of be the change that you want to see in the world in your Instagram story, check the box and move on. And I think the work is the work, and you got to really dig in. You got to listen to Black people, listen to Black women, support and believe them when they talk about their experiences. And that's really all you have to do. Like it requires no commentary. It requires it's just a thumbs up. Like I hear you, I see you. And, in that moment, I heard you big time. And I wanted to make sure that I stood up for you in that moment.
Well,
and we didn't know each other.
No, we didn't know each other. And it's funny because I actually thought you were mixed until you said that you were white. And I'm like, dude, I thought you was just a really light-skinned mixed person. I
had that Mexico tan,
Yeah, it was the way that you carried yourself.
Priya, before we covered this subject, you look like you had something to add to our last discussion. I want to give you a chance to have the floor before we close.
Oh yeah, I was when Sharice was speaking, and then she's like, she's grown accustomed to. In my head, I was like being let down, and then she said it, and I'm new to the community, and I've grown accustomed to being let down too. So sometimes I just see these things that companies or even individuals post as performative, and I don't believe you. I don't believe what you're saying. I don't. And I mean, sometimes even you can read a post and know somebody's not genuine about it. And then another thing that she was saying about, just including diabetes, you don't have to say type 1, you don't have to say a certain type. And like a lot of my posts, I like to post things that are helpful to me or that I think would help other diabetics. And I used to use the hashtag like type 1 a lot. And I don't know, for some reason, I think my past like 3 or 5 posts, I felt a need to just put diabetes on it. because I don't know where that came from, but I just felt like it doesn't matter if it's type 1 or whatever type it is. I just think this information can help anybody with diabetes. So I feel like what you were saying is so true. I don't think there should be segregation anymore within the community of people posting just type 1 type stuff or type 2 type stuff. I just think diabetes altogether, all of the information will be helpful to anyone with any kind of diabetes. And then I know we were talking earlier about, like, you know, when you go to see the diabetes educator and there's sometimes like a dietitian that you're talking to and you like to eat your, I think you said it was like beef patties or something. I can't remember what you said. So my sister actually became a registered dietitian because of my diabetes. She was only 11 when I got diagnosed and I was 16. And she comes in contact with, you know, a lot of patients, Guyanese patients, Jamaican, you know, and the food that they eat, other dietitians don't know how to, you know, accommodate or, you know, count the calories for, but my sister knows how to do that. And actually, a lot of patients would come in, she works in inpatient rehab, and they would test their A1Cs, and all these people would go home without knowing that they actually had diabetes or were pre-diabetic. So she spoke to a lot of the doctors there, and now they have a program in place to where if you come in with this, you're going out with this information. And I think that's so important because so many people get their A1Cs tested and don't know that they're pre-diabetic or even diabetic. So I think having more people in the healthcare field that are more aware of different cultures, so they can help in that aspect, as well as being more aware of, okay, this is pre-diabetes, like that's serious, and people should be told about that instead of just being able to go home until they go into DKA. So that's what I had to say about all that.
No, I think it's so important. And I mean, even just seeing blogs about how to count carbs for Chinese food, for Indian food, for Mexican food, for soul food, you know, those aren't the traditional American diet. And I mean, this is a headline, like the traditional American diet is causing diabetes. It's not helpful to know what, you know, and I think cultural food and the erasure of culture in diabetes education is something that I hope we can just erase, frankly, because it sets you back. You can't. So now I can't eat with my family. Now I can't you know, enjoy the foods that bring me joy, that are the foods of my people. I think what's cool about what we've talked about from a community standpoint is on the internet, for better or worse, there's no like great, you know, rubric that you can post whatever you want. And a lot of really cool, good people are breaking ground, frankly, and doing the work to bring diabetes into their world and making it fit rather than vice versa. And I think that's, I don't know, it gives me hope because I know there's incredible creative people with diabetes that I have not met who are going to impact people's lives because because of people like you laying the groundwork. So that is my professional transition into thanking all of you for being here this evening, for giving your time above and beyond, for being truly more than a diabetic, and for participating in this campaign. I appreciate all of you, and looking forward to continuing to work together.
Guys,
Thank you.
Y'all making my dreams come true. This series, I'm so excited, and I can't wait to showcase you guys, make y'all look fly.
Thank you for listening to More Than a Diabetic on Diabetics Doing Things. We are going to continue this 4-part series all the way through January 2021. You can find all of the content that we posted about More Than a Diabetic on diabeticsdoingthings.com/more than a diabetic with dashes in between each word. So more dash than dash a dash diabetic. And on Instagram, you can use hashtag more than a diabetic and see all of the little micro content that we're putting out there, all of the individual show graphics, and all of the Instagram handles of our amazing guests. So keep it locked for more than a diabetic here on Diabetics Doing Things.